Welcome, Kelly, to the Dating Intentionally podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Talia.
Yay! Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. The first question I ask all my guests is, what are you being intentional about lately, or what do you want to be more intentional about?
I heard some quote recently that says you can figure out a person's values by how they spend their time and how they spend their money. So you can look at their bank statement and you can look at their schedule, like what they were doing yesterday. And that is such a small reminder to be really thoughtful about who you're spending your time with, where you're putting your money, and kind of what we fill our schedules with. I think is how we fill our lives. So I've been thinking a lot about, just especially because I'm an academic, over the summer we have a lot more freedom in how we use our days. Trying to
Yes.
be really thoughtful about that.
Can I tell you something nerdy that I do that I do to like be thoughtful about it?
Please.
Okay, so I time block my entire calendar every single week, but I will retroactively adjust it to what actually happened. So not only am I planning to like have my week play out a certain way, I've been doing this for years, adjusting it. So if I scrolled on social media for an hour, that is in my calendar.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Just an idea if you want to try that to see how you're really spending your time, like getting really honest with yourself.
I get very scared when I get my weekly report, and I deleted Instagram from my phone so I can only go on via the internet, like on my computer. And so, gosh, that would be very intimidating, but a really good idea.
Just an idea.
Yeah.
I love that you shared that. And I'm just so happy here. So, just for listeners, we connected when you reached out to me about an article you're working on about prenups, which we will absolutely dive into. But can you share a little bit more about your work, like how you got here and like what you're working on right now?
Yeah, so my background is in English and in film and media studies, with an emphasis on American studies. So my master's is in English and my PhD is in film and media studies and cultural studies. And when you kind of come up as an English person, a lot of what you study is genre. So, like, what are the expectations of, let's say, an audience, a reader who goes in reading a Gothic novel, for instance? They want to be scared, they maybe want to be a little titillated, etc. And as I started kind of branching out more into cultural studies and specifically looking at stories for women written by women, I found that there really is this kind of genre that we prescribe to American women in particular, which is first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes babies. And because I started doing a lot of ethnographic work during my PhD and actually talking to people, I realized women's lives are actually so much more interesting and so much more complicated than that. And in my own life, a lot of my friends were starting to get married and things like that. And there was often this distinction between what you say when you're in a group about whatever your situation is, whether it's you're engaged to be married or you want to have kids, versus what people were saying one on one. And I think that we often feel we have to adhere to this narrative. And the more that I started digging, I realized older women often feel betrayed by that genre. And so, especially as I teach Gen Z students, I want them to approach this genre with some kind of awareness that where do those betrayals happen and how can we prevent the betrayals from happening? And so that's kind of where I landed today.
I love it. And you've written so many amazing pieces for the Washington Post, New York Times, and more. And I love reading your work and hearing you talk about this stuff. But can you tell me a little bit more about what do you mean by betrayals?
So there was this study I found. There was a big article in the Times that I did not write, someone else wrote, and it said that more and more older people, particularly older women, said that they didn't want to live with a romantic partner again, specifically heterosexual women. And so I wanted to dig into what the academic literature was on that subject. And there was a study that found that the reason why these women did not want to move in with a male partner ever again, even though they wanted to date and they wanted to fall in love again, if they were divorced or if they lost their spouse, they were widowed, they said that they recognized their disadvantages in a heterosexual marriage, specifically when they were in the home. And so they felt that they did a lot more of their share of domestic labor. And then older women also found, and this is something like if any of your listeners ask their moms or their grandmothers, a lot of older women find that older men are looking for a nurse with a purse. So they're looking for someone to financially support them or like give them their pills every day. And so I think that we're often taught that the greatest love you're ever going to find is in your romantic partner. But when you start kind of isolating yourself from your wider community, I think, and giving more and more time at home and cleaning up after your spouse and your children if you have them, I think you start to realize that you missed out on some stuff. And so I think that's when I became really, really interested in the question of betrayal.
Okay, got it. Wow. And it's so interesting that like now we get to have these conversations with older women who have been married, especially with like in a more modern kind of society that we live in. You know, it's like, things have changed a lot from if you're thinking about someone who is like 67 years old, what their parents did to what's happening now. It's so different. The question that popped in my head was like, is the answer to avoiding this betrayal? Like, does this happen in the dating process? Like when you're searching for a partner, does it happen in the conversations you have in a longer term relationship when you're discussing how you're going to handle the different kinds of labor in a marriage? Like what do you think about that? Is it both?
Well, I think a big part of the narrative is if you just find the golden ticket, if you find someone great to marry, and I'm thinking really mostly about heterosexual women because queer marriages tend to be much happier than heterosexual marriages. So I'm thinking of heterosexual women here. I think that there's this idea, and this I really believe comes from the marriage plot. Like when you read an Austen novel, it ends with the marriage, and that's all we've been driving to for this entire story, right? And so I think that we have this idea that if you can just like find someone who seems good, right? And you care for that person and they care for you, and then you get married, everything will be good and you've kind of won the game, right? But I think there's so much that happens after that. And I think that dating today, and I wrote an article about like the relationship between dating and job searching for the New York Times. I think there's a lot of cruelty that we treat people with who are single and who are looking for a job. And I think it's a problem that our country has made it so difficult to be single and to not have a full-time job, because you shouldn't have to have a romantic partner to be happy. But I think there are all of these kind of systems at play that make it very challenging to be single. And so I just think that betrayals happen both in the dating process, but we're more attuned to those. And I think we're less likely to talk openly about what happens actually when you get married.
Right, because I mean, yes, because like when you're married, it's more like you're locked into this choice. You kind of have to stand by that choice. You kind of have to stand that ground with all 10 toes, you know, like if you say anything where it's like, I'm not happy, or this isn't what I envisioned. Happily ever after is not happening right now.
Yeah.
You know, I could think of someone who I know who's older and has been divorced and remarried, and they've told me that they regret getting remarried, kind of like what you were saying. They're like, I don't know if I was supposed to get married again. I think I was supposed to be just in a relationship but not married. And I think it's because this person I'm thinking of, like, there's financial stuff, there's like later in life stuff that you don't think about dealing with when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, getting married, that's going to happen down the line.
Yep. And I think it's easier when you're with your girlfriends. I've been learning about these PowerPoint. One of my friends had a PowerPoint birthday party where like they all brought in photos of people they were dating and were like presenting on them, like awful exes and things like that. I think it's a lot easier to talk about challenges when you're dating and a lot less harder when it's in the marriage, because you really want to protect the person that you chose to spend your life with. And so I think that there are betrayals that kind of happen throughout, and I think there are ways to mitigate those betrayals. But if we can't even acknowledge that this is happening to a lot of people, I think it's easy to be like, well, it's my fault. If I just work harder, if I'm just better, then I can make this better and I can be happy. But what if it's all acting against you? And I think if you can acknowledge also, you know, I now I'm 33, so I have friends who have gotten divorced at this point. And I think if you can not blame yourself, I think it's easier to bring up struggles when you're having them with your spouse and prevent them from kind of growing into much bigger problems. But if we can't even acknowledge these things because we think that we're to blame, then it's not going to get better.
Yeah, I mean, one piece of advice I always give people on this podcast is like, when you're choosing someone to marry or be with for the rest of your life in any capacity, if you're scared to bring things up to them, that is a red flag kind of in you. You need to figure that
Yeah.
out. Like if for the person you are going to be with for the rest of your life, you need to be able to safely bring things up. Maybe it's unsafe for you because of how they react and like their issues, and maybe it's also how you are internally reacting to the idea of even saying something out loud that's really scary to put out there in the world. So it's like, or it's both. So I think for listeners who are hearing this, it's like we're not saying like don't get married, be scared of marriage, like this is going to happen to you. It's more just like when you're dating, carefully consider like, can I actually voice things to this person that are hard?
Yeah, and it's really good data if you voice something thoughtfully
Yes.
to someone and they flip out.
Yes, I have an example from my relationship that I'll share. Like when Johnny, my husband, and I were moving to from Seattle to Mountain View, there was a minute there where like, okay, he made a big risk. He took a big risk and he basically like went from one job to another job, but he kind of quit his job before he had an official job offer at the next place. It was like coming. It's like it's a government job, so it's really
Yeah.
slow.
Yeah.
And there was a minute where I was like, listen, like we might have to do something. Also, we signed a lease. We signed a lease in California before he got the job, which is
Yeah.
a huge risk. So there was like this moment of like, okay, there might be a situation where you have to move to California to like start our lease and I have to like, or I have to stay, or I move and you stay. Like, and that was really hard. Or like there was a moment where I was like, maybe we have to just eat the lease. We have to cancel it and not get our deposit back or something like. And that I remember felt really hard to talk about because it was like a worst case scenario kind of conversation, but very close to reality.
Yeah, and I love my job because I get to the people I speak to for my articles are very happy people in their relationships, and that's why they're willing to talk to me, right? There's often a lot of pride and this is working for me and I want to kind of show everyone why it's working for me. Sometimes I hang up the phone and I almost have to like prevent myself from tearing up a little bit because of the things that people tell me
Aw.
about their spouse. Like there was one man I interviewed who I had gotten to know his wife very well, but you always have to talk to the husband too. Like there are two sides to everything. They both grew up in traditional families. She had never lived on her own. She went from living with her family to moving in with him, her husband. And so she approached him because COVID happened and she just felt like she was so stifled, lost a lot of herself during that time. And she said, hey, I think if I don't have this experience of living alone later in life, I'm really going to regret it. And he said the sweetest thing to me. I said, well, how did you respond? When she said that, that's a pretty big thing to say, right? And he said, well, I would never dismiss anything that she said. And I'm like, this marriage is going to last. Because to a lot of people, I think they would say, do you not like me? Are we going to get divorced? But he just said, I trust her and I know how much she loves me and I love her. And why don't we try and see how this goes? And they ended up moving back in together. But that was a really, I don't know, I think it's such a great indication of the health of a relationship when you learn that someone can bring up something so vulnerable and their spouse doesn't take it personally.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Like you were saying earlier, it's a great data point. Definitely something to don't I'm not saying like force vulnerability or force a moment like this in dating, but if you are in a new relationship or in the early stages of dating someone, you can voice something when it comes up. So I want to switch gears here and talk a little bit about what you first reached out to me with, which is your piece about prenups. From what I remember, you are writing about women initiating prenups. Am I right about that?
So my assumption when I went in was that
Okay.
it was mostly women initiating prenups because there's been a very dramatic increase in the amount of prenups that are happening. So there's a recent survey that found I think it was 40% of millennial respondents said that who are engaged or who have been married said that they had a prenup. And I think maybe my like Instagram algorithm was making me believe that it was mostly women doing this because I was trying to figure out why this dramatic jump. And it sounds like that is really not the case. I spoke to the founder of Hello Prenup, and they're responsible for many, 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 a high percentage of prenups in the US. And it's about 50% of people who initiate are women. So it's really quite split, but I'm really just exploring like why this dramatic jump. And I found it fascinating that there's such a high percentage of people who have prenups, but people are not as willing to talk about them.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, obviously in my one, situation, just my lived experience is I brought up a prenup in my relationship. And what I discovered along in the process is that none of my married friends, not even my mom who remarried, have a prenup, which really blew my mind because I'm like, aren't more people doing this now? But none of my friends who are my age and married had one.
What gave you the idea to ask for one?
So honestly, and I've talked about this before, my parents are divorced. My husband's parents are divorced.
Yep.
I'm a business owner. I just felt like this is the smart thing to do. Like,
Yeah.
not that I expect to be divorced, but it's like, let's just dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Let's
Yeah.
really do it fully. And I am so glad we had the process of doing it because we were able to talk about some really hard things, like we were mentioning earlier, that actually probably could have caused betrayals down the line. Like we had to get into these conversations about our expectations. So now I kind of know exactly where my husband is on certain things that I maybe wouldn't have if we hadn't gone down that road.
That's what I'm hearing over and over is it's kind of similar to premarital counseling that you have to go through if you get married with like a rabbi or a priest. Everything has to be laid out on the table. If you go to Catholic marriage counseling, they're going to ask you like, what is the role of sex in your marriage? How many children do you want? All of these things. And similar for folks I know who got married with rabbis. And it's also a way of kind of saying, are these people compatible with each other? Like it's the financial version of that. And something that, there's also this idea that prenups are for rich people. And the first couple I spoke to, her husband asked for the prenup because they both had really great pensions through their work. They live in Idaho and he got it done through the Teamsters. He's a truck driver and it was the lawyer. They were able to get it for free through his union. And so we do have this idea, and I think it really comes from Sex and the City, like this narrative, again, genres, right? Genres, like this idea that it is the wealthier party who asks for it. Often it is a wealthy man and a woman who might end up being financially reliant on him. The man asks for it. And I'm finding that that is just not the case. And almost all of the couples I've spoken to, there was either one party had purchased like a house on their own or one party was a business owner. And the partner of that person was like, I don't really want, this is their baby. They made this before we even met. I want them to keep this and I don't want to be responsible either. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think the rise in prenups also has to do with how much later people are marrying.
I watched my parents go through this really nasty divorce because my dad was a partial owner in my mom's business and it just lasted forever. They were like a financial warfare with each other, kind of. Yeah. It was like and I was in high school, so I knew what was going on. They couldn't really hide anything because, when you're in high school, you just have the intelligence to know what's happening. Yep. So yeah, I think that really influenced me in my decision. And luckily my husband was on board. I don't think he would have brought it up. I don't think he would have wanted one if I said nothing, so I think, but he was just like, cool, maybe that makes sense. He was fine with it. He didn't take it any type of way. He wasn't like, oh, she thinks we're going to get divorced. Oh, yeah. Like she thinks I'm going to try and screw her out of money or whatever. Like, by the way, my husband has a higher net worth than me. So not like we're still pretty even. I wouldn't say it's like dramatically higher, but it's not 100% even either.
Yeah, I write about things, writing on married couples who live apart or married couples who sleep in separate beds. And usually people are just begging to talk to me, even though, only 3% of Americans who are married live in a separate house from their spouse. I had more people wanting to talk to me than I could handle for that article. And I've never had the experience of people saying, I don't really want to talk about this. And it's interesting because I feel like the implication of all of these things, whether it's sleeping apart or living apart or prenup, is that like the marriage is on the rocks or this relationship is on the rocks. But I think that there is something about money that makes people very, very uncomfortable. But it meant a lot to me to see that you are open about this. And I think that I was talking to like a very high powered divorce lawyer in New York. And he said he has, clients of his who are public figures and they'll say publicly, I didn't get a prenup. And he's like, I wrote that prenup for you. Wow. And so it's important work because I do think that knowing where your money is, information is control. And I think particularly for women, it's really, really important to have agency through information. So the more that we can talk about this stuff, the better.
Yeah. So, okay, you kind of zoomed out there on talking about, people choosing to sleep in separate bedrooms, live separately, which is what you've written about in the past, having prenups. And there's all this stigma around it, right? Even though the people who do it are really enthusiastically want to talk about it because they like their choice. So if you were to rewrite the genre or rewrite this narrative, like what would that look like? Maybe living in a world where this is more accepted.
I think first, I was with friends over the weekend, and one of my friends is actually broke off an engagement, and she's now living with her sister. They share this apartment, and they have this like amazing rooftop, and everyone is always over at their house. And she was recently at a family event where someone, like an uncle, came up to her and was like, I'm concerned about you two. Like, you really don't want to become spinsters. And I think first, making it okay to be single and making it like creating a world where we are not forcing it would be different if you talk to women in their 70s and they were like, marriage served me well, like it was so fulfilling. I would feel differently if that was the outcome, but so often it's not the outcome. That all of this kind of coercion, I think, is something that we really have to work on in our culture, because I think that, there is all this data that says single women are actually happier than married women. They're actually healthier than married women, and it's the opposite with men. So that is the first thing. But I think if so many of us, we love, and I study these romance genres, right? Like, I love this stuff. First of all, not severing yourself from your community and your network and your family is really important. Like, if you meet someone and you fall in love, maintaining those relationships, if you've had friends since you were in middle school, not just kind of taking off for your partner, is really important. I think that, and some people might not, want to maybe have a job outside the home. I think like there are people my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She really found a lot of fulfillment in that. I'm one of 4 kids. Like, she loved it, but we have to be more accommodating toward families with 2 working parents. And I think that we just have to be really careful about the impossible and also often invisible expectations that happen when you enter into a romantic relationship. Like, just because you fall in love with someone doesn't mean you have to get engaged. If you get engaged, you can do a mutual proposal. Maybe you're a woman who's like, listen, I don't want to be proposed to. Yeah. Like, there are, but I think when you don't have examples of other ways of going about things, how are you going to have a choice, right?
Right.
And maybe you do want to have a very conventional proposal, but you're like, I am, an introvert. I love my little studio apartment. I want to stay here. Maybe we buy a house where I have the top floor and he has the bottom floor, right? Like, there are so many options there. And now more and more people, there's just an article in The Atlantic by someone whose work I really admire, Kelly Coyne, about people who are raising children with their friends. And this idea of the nuclear family kind of as its own unit only really came about in like the 50s. You used to be very much embedded in this extended family network. And over time, we have just completely fetishized this idea of isolating yourself and being self-sufficient. And it just is not, psychologists say that like emotional portfolios act similarly to financial portfolios, and that you want to diversify. You want to have a lot of different people in your life fulfilling different roles. So I think prodding all of the different elements of this genre, making visible the many different ways you can go about things, and then not stigmatizing different ways of going about things, I think will be really, really important in terms of allowing people options in terms of who they spend their time with and where they live and, where they spend their money and all of those things.
I love your answer. I agree. It's like, when did different become bad? Marriage has just such a chokehold on our society, and like, why can't we just knock it off its pedestal? Yeah. And I say this as someone who got married, like I've been married for 9 months, but I love it. I'm pretty happy. We're really excited to start a family. Like, I'm going down the first comes marriage and the baby carriage, whatever
Yeah.
path. But, we have a prenup. Also, yes, I did propose back to my husband.
Yep.
He did wear an engagement ring, which was
Yep.
very different. I actually was in an article about that. Like, there was a guy who interviewed me about that. I guess it's becoming a little more popular. Like, why don't men wear engagement rings? It makes no sense.
I actually pitched that article and my editor didn't take it, but I wanted to write on men who wear engagement rings.
Yeah, I got him it was like a kind of titanium, I think. Like it was like a gray, like thick, like ring. And now he wears like a wedding band, but it was just like he could wear that as like a fashion choice. You know what I mean? It wasn't necessarily marriage or wedding ring.
It wasn't a huge diamond.
No, it wasn't platinum. It wasn't you know. But I like going against the grain on things, and I think life is just so much more interesting with different options. And like, why not live with your sister? Why not raise kids with your friends? Like, why do we have to do it all in this one specific way? It's more fun with variety.
Yeah, and it's like I study American literature very closely, and I've written a lot on like Sylvia Plath, Toni Morrison. I teach Carmen Maria Machado, and many of these literary giants, these women, were divorced or separated. And I'm like studying their lives and their work so closely and thinking through how they felt misled by this genre has been so, I mean, Toni Morrison was extremely critical of she wrote this amazing novel called Sula, which I think everyone should read. It came out in the 70s, and it's about two best friends. They grow up together, and then one of them gets married and kind of takes off. And it isn't until the end of their life where both women were like, oh no, we really missed out. Like, this stuff has been written about for a long time, and I think that we really do need women to openly say, hey, I felt like I had some agency when I proposed to my partner, or I felt like Sylvia Plath moved to England to be closer to her husband's family, and then he cheated on her after they had babies together, and she was alone in this country where she did not have a community, and she died of suicide, which is a very dark ending, obviously, but I think she really believed the genre, and I think maybe things would have been different if she stayed in the US, or maybe if she held off on having kids for a little bit. All of these little micro choices that we can make thoughtfully, but you really have to be intentional about them.
So applying this to our lives, like for listeners, where do you think we can start with thinking about, like, what if I don't want to do this genre of marriage? Like, how do you know if it's maybe you want a different path?
Gosh, it's so hard to even recognize it, because I think women use this genre to bond with each other so much, right? Yes. And in order to be legible as a woman, it's like, are you seeing anyone? Like, let's hear those dating stories. And I think there is this big thing called the 4B movement, where I don't know if you've talked about it on the podcast.
I haven't talked about it, but I've heard about it, yes.
Yeah, women who are just kind of saying, I am not going to make any choices for men. I am not going to talk about them. Like, I'm not going to put on makeup for them. If I want to put on makeup for myself, that's fine. But I'm not looking for that right now. And paying attention to kind of how those women's lives have been transformed, I think is very cool, because this is new. And creating a culture where there's something called the Bechdel test, which originally happened with movies. Like, are there two women alone in a room? Check that box. Do they have one conversation about something other than a man? I think that it's hard to uncover our desires if even questioning what your group of friends bonds over, like, will isolate you. And so I don't know how to figure out if you don't want it, but I do think that queer communities are a lot more open to this kind of thing. The nuclear family structure and that genre was so exclusionary to queer people for a very, very long time, that if you are questioning whether this genre is for you, I think spending some time with queer people, and I live in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of queer community groups around, like you go and you have coffee, or you learn to like fix your flat on your bike if you're a biker, things like that. I think spending more time with queer people, if this is a genre that you're questioning, queer people are questioning everything all the time. And I think they might be able to help you kind of figure out, hey, actually, I want to live my life where I center friendship rather, and maybe have people, men come in and out of my life, but I'm not sure. Or maybe I figure out, I have a friend who just figured out she's bisexual, like you can kind of uncover more what you really, really want once you know that those desires will be accepted.
I love that you point that out. It's like, it's really hard to figure it out if you don't feel like there's a channel for acceptance, because that is wired into us as humans. Like we need acceptance to thrive and survive in our communities. So that's a really, really good point. I find also like exposing myself, if you don't have queer communities you can tap into easily or just don't even know where to start with that, I think social media can be a good place to start. Yeah. Like filling your feed with different kinds of people living different kinds of lives. That has helped me a lot in my life. Again, I say this as someone who is going down the normal path in a lot of ways, and not in some ways. Like I haven't had a 9-to-5 jobs in 10 years, like I don't think I ever will again. Yeah. So like there's a lot of different ways to design your life. And I think it's daunting. It's a little overwhelming when you're like, where do I even start? But I do love this conversation of like, maybe we shouldn't just fixate on this one path that actually isn't leading a lot of women to feeling satisfaction later in life.
Yeah. And something else I think about, like particularly with groups of friends where it's predominantly straight women, making sure you show up for both friends who are single and friends who are not single, showing up for life events that are not related to this genre, right? So like if your friend is turning 30 is a big birthday, right? Maybe your friend is married and you went to the wedding, but go to her 30th birthday party. If you have a friend who's single, make sure you show up for their birthdays. If they get a big promotion at work, celebrate that promotion. So much of our showing up has to do with hitting these life milestones, and we need to find other, maybe you adopt a dog and you treat it like a baby shower, but for a dog. Like I really think that we have to find other ways to congratulate women outside of this path. And you can do both. But I think particularly with single friends, like single people are watching their friends go down this path often, and it can be painful. And so just letting them know, hey, you're still my friend, even though you're not throwing a baby shower, I think is really, really important. And again, queer communities are much better than this than communities with mostly heterosexual women.
I love it. I'm feeling inspired. I'm like, I need to like go back to my notes and be like, what are my friends? What are they doing? And how can I celebrate them? I know that you focus a lot in culture and gender stuff. So I asked my audience, what are gender norms in dating that they do and don't like? And I was really interested in these results, and I know you will be too. So I had these 2 question boxes. And I think the one that got more answers was what people don't like. And my audience is 80% women. Okay. But I had a lot of men chime in here too. But I don't know if this is expected, but I was surprised that all of the answers, like I would say not all, like 80% of the answers were about men. I guess like from women, like people commenting on gender norms around men and how men act in dating, not women, like how they're supposed to act. Yep. Which I didn't expect that. But here's what people don't like. The guy has to be the one to take the lead. Both men and women share that they don't like this. Okay. And that included making contact after the first date, driving things forward. Women have to wait for the man to call. Women have to wait for the man to say, I love you. And the idealization of passive or submissive women being presented as feminine, that being presented as like superior to, I don't know, the alternative. Yeah. And then other ones were that they don't like women having to date older men or having to date men who earn more money, women doing more domestic labor. That's what people don't like. Yep. What do you think about this?
I mean, definitely tracks. It's interesting because I do talk to a lot of same-sex couples. Mm-hmm. And like I've talked to, so for instance, I was talking to a family it was 2 gay men. I think they had 2 kids. And one of the fathers he was a stay-at-home dad. And he was like, I loved when my husband proposed to me. He got me this huge diamond. It just made me feel so special. And I totally get the feeling of like wanting to be pursued and desired, but I think that it would make me so anxious to have to wait around for that. And, I've had friends who, got engaged and they were like, finally. And I'm like, oh my God, what a hard way to spend like 2 years being like, is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? And I do think, especially compared to our parents' generation, like, it seems like it's pretty normal now to, like, you wouldn't propose to someone without having a conversation about it. And
Yes.
women are now like, I think most of my friends who are married, they designed their ring or they had a very big say in what they wanted in their ring. Where like talking to my parents, you wore this piece of jewelry for your life, even if you maybe didn't like it. But yeah, it completely tracks that. Of course, women don't want to do more domestic work. And like,
Yeah.
there's not just the actual labor of like cleaning up after meals and all of that, but there's also this phenomenon that I've learned a little bit about in talking to so many straight women is when their husband like enters the room, they suddenly have this like wife gaze on them, like where they're like, I am now his wife. Like, you have to make sure he's okay. You have to acknowledge him. And it can be hard to even figure out like what you want when you feel like you need to first make this other presence in the home feel comfortable.
That's so interesting. I never feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's probably like that's probably good. But I also understand like women have been socialized to make sure that everyone is comfortable. Like, that is your responsibility.
Right.
And so it makes sense to me. But this stuff is not surprising to me at all. And I'm curious, did they say that they really liked any norms?
Yes. So let's talk about what they do like. So this is a different question box. And again, the number one comment was men being chivalrous. So they do like chivalry. That included opening doors, opening the car door, and walking on like the traffic side of the street so that you're on the non-traffic side of the street. Those are like the three main examples of chivalry today. I mean, I can think of so many more examples that weren't mentioned. Both men and women said they like chivalry. Some women said men protecting women, which I find really ironic because I feel like men can be very dangerous to women.
Yeah.
I'm never like, oh, I'm so glad my husband's here to protect me. I never have ever felt this way.
Yeah.
I don't know. Men being, quote, providers. Someone wrote men being more open to therapy. Okay, cool. I guess that's changing. And a lot of just this phrase exactly, men taking the lead. And that includes planning dates, considering details, pursuing, initiating the first kiss. And a lot of people also said, I can't think of one. So
really?
yeah. So but what I found really interesting and just like kind of points to just how dating today is just all over the place is some people really like the norm of men taking the lead and some people really don't. And men and women both answered this.
Have you talked to or like had an episode on Field? Have you heard of that app?
I used Field at some point, yeah.
Because I have a friend who's been really not happy in the dating market. And I was like, you should try Field. And she was like, no, that's like a little bit more kinky. But I feel like it's more about really being clear about who you are and what you want, whether it's kink or not, you know?
Yeah. I think Field has now become more of a catch-all for people who are like, Hinge isn't working.
Yeah.
So they're going to Field. Yeah. So I'm just saying there are people on there who are not necessarily there to explore kinks. It's like it's both. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, why do you bring Field up in the context of these norms?
I've never been on Field, but I've read about it and I've heard about it. And I feel like that app is more aware of a lot of norms that...
So you could say, like, I like men who step up, like, kind of thing on Field?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've heard that, like, there are a lot of couples who are, like, looking for a third, which is a kink.
Yeah.
But, like, it feels a little bit like, again, I keep on bringing up queer relationships, but like a queer relationship, you really have to talk through things like in the bedroom because there isn't that normal genre progression, right? Of like kissing, then like intercourse.
You have to make up your own rules, basically.
Yeah,
and you have to really be open about it for sure.
Yeah. And so I do think straight people have so much to learn from that community, not just in terms of like non-sex, but also in terms of sex. And Field to me feels like a much more like app that prods a lot of norms that straight people can't even see. Yeah,
I agree. I think for the dater who you know what you want or you're really open about being able to, you can communicate that really easily, go check out Field. You never know. You might find someone who really matches what you're looking for because it's like more the culture of Field to be upfront. It's like your profile is like, this is what I want, whether you're into kinks or not. I think what this little poll showed me is that there's someone for everyone. Like, if you are someone who likes that a guy pays for all the dates. Like there's going to be a guy out there who does prefer that. And if not, like I'm not someone who like that. I don't like the guy has to lead narrative. I really am pretty against this personally. So I, ended up with someone who likes that. When we met, I earned more than him and likes that I know exactly what I wanted. I laid out the timeline for him. Like, this is the timeline I'm on. This is when I want to get married. This is when I want to get engaged. So it's like, this is it. Like either you're in or you're out.
Yep.
And he was on board for that. So
yeah, you got to do that work up front though. You got to do that vetting, because I feel like it's easy to fall in this trap of like, he works in all of these elements except for one. I can maybe change that one element. And it's like, if this is someone who will always want an open relationship and that's not what you want, it's like, don't go in with that hope. Like there is someone out there who wants to be monogamous. So look for that kind of person.
Yeah. I'm really excited to see what happens with your prenup article when it comes out, because, you said that just under 50% of people have them now.
Yeah. Well, millennials.
Yeah. Millennials. Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know if I should bring up a prenup, it's like, you can do that. Like if you're listening and you're like, I don't know if I could bring up separate bedrooms or like, just an alternative way of living, like you can bring it up. You can absolutely talk about it in a way that is not going to destroy the relationship. And if it does, maybe it wasn't meant to be.
Exactly. And something that I did gather from couples with prenups is the best time to bring it up is before the engagement, because it's also data. Like if this person reacts in a way that is upsetting, that's important data, because maybe you don't feel safe bringing up things for a good reason. And there was one woman who I was talking to who asked for one, and she said the reason she asked for one is because she's a lawyer and she was going through law school and studying for the bar as she was thinking about getting engaged with her husband. And she said that she lives in Florida. She said in Florida law, the later the prenup conversation comes up, the more likely it's going to be regarded as coercive. So if like someone brings up a prenup 3 days before you marry, she was like, how can that not be seen as coercive?
Also, you can't do that. Sorry, prenups take a long time.
Yeah, exactly. So get on it. And they're also, if you want one, like there are, I have never used, Hello Prenup, but there are places that can make this more affordable. Look at if you or your partner has a union, see if they'll help you with that. This is not something that's just for rich people anymore.
Agree. We didn't use Hello Prenup. We definitely looked at it and we ended up spending, I think, together around $5,000 on our prenup, just to be transparent. Because I think it's important to be transparent about these things. Let's actually talk about it out loud.
Yep. Yep. And there are many different kinds of prenups too,
Yes. Well, I'm really excited for that to come out. Are there any other thoughts you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I just hope that, the more I study genre and things like that, women's relationships with each other, it's so important. Like, do not give up your friendships if you get married. I think that being embedded in a community and a network is oxygen for a relationship. Like, I think in order for a flame to continue going, you need to give it air. And so I would just encourage everyone to, whether you want that life path or whether you don't, make sure that you really have, a diverse emotional portfolio and many different people in your life, because I think it can put a lot of pressure on a relationship to load everything onto one person.
I so appreciate you for sharing that and everything that we've talked about today. This has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Talia, for having me.